presentation is being recorded, and it will be available on our website after this meeting this evening. If I could get the slides to advance. This evening, we have a variety of city staff with us, so I'll start by having a few introductions. I am Jennifer Gonzalez. I'm the Director of Environmental Services for the City of Hoboken. Also here with us this evening, we have Yasmin Pesar. She is our Environmental Planner. Director Ken Ferranti, he is our Director of Public Safety. Caleb Stratton, he's our Chief Resiliency Officer and Assistant Business Administrator. And Sergeant William Montanez, he is our Coordinator for Emergency Management. Throughout the presentation this evening, any of those individuals might be jumping in to assist, to answer some of your questions. The presentation is fairly short. We wanted to leave a good amount of time for Q&A at the end. So just to set a few expectations for the evening, we'd like you to use the Q&A box if you have questions during the presentation. There will be time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation, but we'll have all participants muted until questions and answers. This meeting, as I said, will be recorded. If you have questions that need to be addressed later, all of our contact information will be shared at the end of the presentation. So here's a brief agenda for the evening. We're going to talk a little bit about flooding from intense rainfall events, which is really why we're undertaking this project, the need for our flood warning system, an overview of the system itself and its benefits, and then we'll wrap up with the proposed locations. So a lot of you are probably familiar with this scene from Hoboken. This is one of the images from Hurricane Ida, which inundated the city with more than 6.5 inches of rainfall in a very short amount of time. The city of Hoboken has a combined sewer system, and that sewer system is prone to flooding of low-lying areas such as the southwest portion of the city and northwest portion of the city when we receive more than 0.8 inches of rain per hour. That is really what we consider an intense rainfall. And those intense rainfall events are only likely to get more frequent and more severe with the projections for climate change moving into the future. Currently, we use wooden barricades like shown in this photo here. They're manually deployed by our Office of Emergency Management, led by Sergeant Montanez here. And those wooden barricades can be moved during storm events. So what we're looking to do with this flood warning system is provide a more permanent, system of barricades that are automatically controlled for rainfall flooding. Here is a map that shows some of our flood-prone roadways. These are the areas where we frequently experience intense rainfall, flooding. They're coded by somewhat likely, very likely, et cetera. But those of you who live and drive through Hoboken know that really all of these areas are prone to flooding during rain events. We've also shown the evacuation routes as well on this map. Sorry, my slides aren't advancing as quickly as I'm clicking. Just some images of flooding during intense rainfall events. I'm sure you're all familiar with this, and that's why you're here tonight listening to this potential strategy that we are proposing to mitigate some of the risk to public health and safety from these events. So here's a little bit about the flood warning system. We plan to install this winter, so really from 22 into 23, an automated flood warning system at some of those flood-prone intersections that you saw on previous slides. The system will safely close these flooded roadways to prevent injury, property damage, and they'll function automatically using a system of sensors that is available to emergency management personnel to monitor in real-time water levels at these flood-prone intersections. The system includes 5 gauging stations. So these are the sensors themselves. Those sensors are installed inside catch basins or sewer inlets. And those sensors can tell when the rainfall is getting close to the catch basin, close to the elevation of the roadway, when it has overtopped the roadway, and how deep it is. 11 corresponding remotes will be installed with both warning signs, in some cases flashing beacons or barricades dependent, and then there's going to be one communication tower that will be located at City Hall, basically like an antenna. So you'll see in this diagram how the system works. I'm hoping that this video goes. So you can see that as the water is surpassing the roadway and the water is over the roadway, the receiver gets a signal, turns on, notifies these flashing beacons that the road is flooded. And then this Contrail software, that's the live software that our emergency management personnel will see, can see the flooding in real time. And that will alert the barricade to go down. This image is really showing the signage, not the barricade itself, but both the flashing signage will come on and then the barricade will go down. So some of the benefits of the flood warning system, it provides immediate response during flood emergencies, which will allow both pedestrians, motorists to know that flooding is likely. It will allow them to move their cars in advance. It will allow the city to provide advanced warning to our residents through our Nixle alerts and social media and the variety of different communications methods that we currently use, but more in real time. And it will improve public safety for our first responders. And Director Ferranti and Sergeant Montanez can speak more to that. But our goal is to protect public health and safety, both for our personnel as well as for the public at large. This will give them real-time notification of flooding, road closures, and after the event, then the barricades can be lifted. And all of this will be visible basically through an online software called Contrail. So here are the specific intersections that we're proposing as the pilot locations for this system. So we're proposing installation of 5 intersections right now, and this system could grow. These locations were selected based on continued both community feedback from residents who have experienced flooding at these intersections, as well as our observations where we currently deploy barricades on a most frequent basis during intense rainfall, where we typically have issues with pedestrians or vehicles driving around barricades or moving barricades. So these locations were chosen both from our observations as city personnel and emergency management personnel, as well as through public engagement. First intersection is North Street and Park Avenue. That will, as you can see in the map here, there will be one gauge, one gauge at Park Avenue and North Street, and then there will be gates to inhibit oncoming traffic from moving westbound on North Street as well as northbound on Park Avenue. Similarly, Site 2 is 2nd and Clinton Street. So there will be a gauge at 2nd and Clinton with gates that will inhibit traffic moving westbound on 2nd Street and northbound on Clinton Street. Site 3 is 1st and Harrison, and there'll be a gauge right at 1st and Harrison with gates at 1st and Marshall, as well as gates at 2nd and Harrison. And then, of note, Patterson Avenue is subject to routine flooding. It is such a high traffic thoroughfare. Barricades would not be able to be used, one barricade, to cross the entire roadway. So we are piloting flashing lights at this location rather than a barricade at this time. Again, the system will evolve as we monitor how it's working. Then we have Site 4, that's 4th Street in Jackson. So the sensor would be at 4th and Jackson with gates at 4th Street to prevent westbound traffic, as well as Jackson and 3rd to prevent northbound traffic. And then lastly, Willow Avenue at 7th Street And that would prevent traffic from going eastbound on 7th Street, as well as southbound on Willow Avenue. And then the last is just the base station at City Hall, which is kind of the communications hub. And that leads us to the Q&A portion of our presentation. I know that we have one question in the chat, which I will answer. And then if you'd like to ask a question, I would suggest that you raise your hand and we'll be able to call on you and you can unmute yourself. So the first question that we received is, can you share data on observations and public engagements for selecting 7th and Clinton Street? Residents on this street claim that the street floods 0 to 2 times per year. So it's actually 7th and Willow that is the subject of repeated flooding. We've received numerous requests for preventing vehicular traffic because there's a lot of wake is probably the best term I could use when cars drive through flooded roadways on Willow and 7th Street. And that's really between Park and Willow. However, we have to prevent eastbound traffic on 7th Street in order to, prevent traffic from coming down the intersection of 7th and Willow. 7th and Willow also only floods 0 to 2 times per year. That's interesting because we don't hear that from residents. We've heard after almost every intense rainfall event that 7th and Willow 7th Street between Willow and Park, and to a lesser extent, 7th Street between Willow and Clinton is a significant issue for flooding. Something I should note is that we also considered the intersection of 9th and Madison, and we did not choose 9th and Madison because there is another infrastructure project that is going to raise the roadway at 9th and Madison, which will mitigate the flooding at that location. I don't see any hands raised. Let's see. Data on frequency of calls. We can certainly look into this. We do definitely get several calls and emails about this. So we can certainly look to see what data we can share. And I'm not sure what federal project you mean, but I would imagine you mean Rebuild by Design Hudson River. And if there is the status, if the question from Ira is the current state of the Rebuild by Design Hudson River project, I think I would like to turn that to Caleb Stratton to answer that question.
Sure. So the project is currently out to bid, and so that's for the seawalls, gates, and levees, and they expect to begin construction in the beginning of next year, closer towards the end of the first quarter. Many of the pieces of infrastructure that are related to rainfall flooding are either under construction or operational, and I can expand on that if there's other questions related to the project.
So seeing no further questions, we can certainly direct you to our webpage, but I'd like to put up our contact information as well. If you'd like to email us with any questions that you have following this presentation. As I noted, this presentation will be available online, and we are available to answer additional questions that you may have.
Jim has his hand raised.
Sure. Jim, would you like to unmute?
Oh, yes, thank you. I posted this in the chat, but just to follow up on the 7th and Clinton location, I mean, as someone who lives in that area, that's it's not an area that I would say regularly floods, and I'm a little confused on the location selection because there are areas, of course, that do regularly flood in Hoboken, for example, near the ShopRite area, but there's no barriers that seem to be deployed there. So I guess my twofold. Are we allocating barriers to the most important areas? And are we potentially labeling areas that are flood prone that are not really flood prone? And to that last point, your slide that you presented in this deck, on the second slide, I believe it was, did not label 7th and Clinton as even a very likely flood area. So I think what I would suggest is, can we go back and sort of analyze that data a little further, and make sure we're allocating our resources to the best appropriate areas? Thank you.
Yeah, we absolutely can. I understand. I hear your concern. The reason we decided on 7th Street rather than the ShopRite area is because the ShopRite area is also undergoing a very significant infrastructure improvement project in 2023, which is a partnership with the North Hudson Sewerage Authority and the City of Hoboken. That project will elevate Madison Street from 9th Street to 11th Street. It will replace the water mains. It will remove a sag in the sewer line on Madison Street and actually redirect flow to the 11th Street trunk line, which will mean that the flow will more effectively be pushed basically to the 11th Street outflow. So, and we are already, working on a separate kind of project to mitigate flooding in the area of ShopRite, and that is why, we no longer consider the ShopRite location. However, I do understand and hear your concern. We can go back to reevaluate that information. Rachel?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm wondering why we're not having a discussion on possibly updating pipes in these areas as well, because all these signs and barricades are really not preventing flood events from happening. So this is kind of like a reactive response, not a proactive response in a sense.
So we are looking at each of these areas. North Hudson Sewerage Authority owns and operates the sewer infrastructure. So any upgrades to that sewer infrastructure would be the responsibility of North Hudson Sewerage Authority. My understanding is that they have looked at 7th Street and, there's not any improvements that they could make that would alleviate a lot of the issues, because most of the issues relate to backflow into properties, and they actually cited 7th Street as one of the reasons why they're pursuing the ejector pump systems for individual properties. However, in terms of future infrastructure investments, we can definitely look into that. We are making major infrastructure investments throughout the city of Hoboken as part of the Rebuild by Design Hudson River project. The delay, store, and discharge components of that project, they include everything from the Northwest Resiliency Park, Southwest Resiliency Park expansion, to a series of more than 60 right-of-way green infrastructure sites. So we've invested millions of dollars in flood mitigation, and we have seen significant reduction in rainfall flooding over the years. But due to elevations, there are certain areas that are going to be prone to flooding, and we want to make sure that if they are prone to flooding, that we're protecting our public safety personnel as well as residents who may travel through those areas. But I hear your point, and we can go back and revisit with North Hudson Sewerage Authority if there are any other improvements to be made in this area.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there could always. I'm not sure if you could hear me anymore, but I'm sure there could always be improvements. I feel like we should brainstorm, different types of ideas to mitigate flooding to the extent possible, not just with barricades and flashing lights, but with actual infrastructure, being put into the ground. So thanks for your time.
If I can, I think the focus, though, of this project in particular is more also public safety, and less so about the actual infrastructure of preventing the flooding in these areas, but more so about monitoring it and preventing car traffic from actually going to these areas when these severe storm events occur. So it's more of a protection and less so about actually the infrastructure of like you're describing, because we do have several other projects that are going around the city where we're actually doing that work, like Jennifer actually just said. So the Southwest Park expansion is just an example of that. We have the right-of-way green infrastructure projects going in, and so this is more so focusing on the signage and the prevention of traffic flow. And I would just stress that that's a priority of this project.
So, do you know when the Northwest Resiliency Project will be completed? And upon its completion, does that 0.8 number change, or does this really not have an effect on central Hoboken?
So the Northwest Resiliency Park will be completed in the spring of 2023, and that park will manage up to 2 million gallons of water from specifically the H6 and H7 sewer sheds. And those sewer sheds are located in Northwest Hoboken. So those are not specifically related to the central Hoboken area. However, they are certainly, relieving the amount of water that's entering the system at any given time during an intense rainfall event. So, something that, we can look at with NHSA are how the sewer sheds relate to the specific area of 7th and Willow, really 7th Street between Park and Willow, which is where we've heard a lot of those concerns, and see if there are any other improvements that, NHSA and or in partnership with the city can make. But again, as Yasmin said, despite all infrastructure improvements, we are still looking to improve public safety in the interim. And okay. Jim? Jim, I think your hand's up.
Oh, apologies. Can you speak for a moment about what the signage would look like? As you said, you mentioned the pilot, the flashing lights model, but that's localized to one area. All the other locations that do have signage, what would they look like? Would they just say, for example, road closed or warning, or would they say this is a flood prone area, for example?
See if I can.
Thank you.
Trying to go back a few slides here if I can. So the specific, it's a better one. Okay, there we go. That's a zoomed in version. So the specific signage would say road closed when flashing. And, that's the idea, is that the actual road closure occurs when the lights are flashing. However, we can also, if the suggestion is, to add something additional about how the area is prone to flooding even when the signs are not illuminated, that's a great suggestion that we can talk to the vendor about as well.
Well, I'm actually the opposite. What I would say to the earlier conversation is, the area may not be flood prone, but I understand the ask to deploy these gates to solve maybe traffic issues or flooding issues downstream, right? To cut off traffic in different arteries. So what I'm saying is, if you do deploy a sign that says flood prone, you're labeling that area miscorrectly, right? So I agree with sort of the earlier point you made. You're better off labeling it road closed. Frankly, you could also use these barriers for other public safety purposes, right? And therefore, you're not labeling that area that is flood prone, that is really not flood prone, and accomplishing your goal, you sort of downstream, right? That you to redirect traffic. So that my takeaway would be to not label these as flood prone areas if they're not.
I think that there is some flexibility with what the sign actually says. And so we can actually send out a survey following this call, this webinar, about maybe what the text says. We can come up with a few different variations of what it could say and maybe get a vote on what the consensus is, because it doesn't necessarily need to say that it floods, flashing when that it's flooded when it flashes. It could say something alternate, like there is flexibility with the vendor for the text itself. So the idea, though, is that, again, it is a safety measure, right? So we want to notify, potential drivers and residents that live in the area, like, do not pass the gate, do not cross over because the road is flooded. So we just need to find a different way, maybe, of posting that sign.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Like, how do you accomplish both goals? The safety while we properly label the areas. I think that's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. Yeah, and then Rachel, just one moment, because I think we have a new speaker, Denise. Denise, are you able to unmute?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
So my question is, I'm someone who lives in one of these areas, and it seems my concern is about flagging these 5 or 6 intersections in particular, and the value of my property as a homeowner. When you put a flashing sign on my corner and only my corner, how are you doing an analysis of that impact for these very specific locations where we're in a situation now where you're going to have a sign that says, whether it says flood prone area or something else, and you're flagging, again, these 5 specific blocks as compared to the rest of Hoboken, where there's much more serious issues in other locations?
I think our goal here is public safety. So, I don't think that we are doing a specific property value assessment. Our goal is to protect lives and really prevent travel through flooded intersections. There are a lot of intersections in Hoboken that flood. We have significant amounts of information available to the public about flood-prone areas. And, I don't know that it's necessarily a secret that Hoboken floods, and we're vulnerable. We need to protect the people who are responding during flood events and the people who potentially might drive through those flooded intersections, stall out a car or worse. And that's our goal here. So, I hear the concern. I would say that we're not singling out any intersections. We are piloting certain intersections based on the amount of really flooding that our emergency management personnel see, as well as concerns that we've received from residents.
So where will this be after the pilot? If you're piloting in these 5 locations, where are they going to be after the pilot?
Well, this is permanent infrastructure, right? So, could it be removed? Yes, it could be removed. But the goal would be that if this type of barricade works at these locations, that we could install them in other locations. Right now, we put barricades out, and Sergeant Montanez, you can probably speak to the number of barricades more. My understanding is, we place at certain times more than 50 barricades out during a storm event. So, there are a lot of intersections where during the more intense rainfall, we might want to consider barricades as well. We're trying to start with intersections that we know are very likely to flood during an intense rain event. Next person who raised their hand, Carl.
Yes. Yeah, I'd like to ask a question concerning the topic of warning. I know that during Sandy, the county alarm system didn't function and the county radio didn't function. Will this warning system coordinate with sounding the county alarm. So anybody who's outside, who's not near a flashing sign, who's in another part of Hoboken, will get warning that something's happening. And then maybe automatically he or she will realize that they should turn on the county warning station. Do your plans include taking advantage of the county radio station and any warning alarms so that in effect you'll be warning more people that something is going on because it may affect them a few minutes later?
So I think that the information that we'll gather from this system, we will present and share with any organization that also wants to use it. The county warning system that you're referencing, I'm not as familiar with. Perhaps Sergeant Montanez might be, but we usually will coordinate not just with county OEM, but also with any state Office of Emergency Management, notifications or recommendations, including evacuations. So, I mean, I think it's a great suggestion, Carl, and we're happy to see what we can provide to the county to be helpful.
Yeah, I think maybe you're not familiar with them because they don't seem to work or be used. I know not only during Sandy didn't the county radio have any important information, but even afterwards when it was up powered so people could hear it, during what was it, Ida? They didn't seem to be broadcasting anything about the flooding due to Ida. So maybe the administration to reach out to them and try to get them to come along with this. I think what you're doing with this warning system, it's a great idea. I just think it could be expanded and you might pick something up before anyone else will. Okay,
thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
Ira, and then we'll come back to Rachel and Jim.
Good evening. Yeah, I'm particularly curious if the so-called gate system that you're proposing will deter actual traffic eastward on First Street, because I live there between Madison and Monroe, and during the storm of Ida last summer, we did suffer some flooding, largely because cars unnecessarily continued to be traveling east on First Street, and they created wakes of water, which there was no way we could stop that from inundating and blowing out, literally onto the first ground level. I don't think I would have suffered the degree of flooding if it were not for the fact that these cars continued unnecessarily. And I say that because I witnessed a few of them, and I have to say that some of these people were joyriding in the storm, literally, perhaps slightly inebriated. And, there was nothing I could do to stop it. But I'm just wondering if this may deter that trafficking in that area.
Well, our hope is that these barricades and signage serve to educate the community that no one should ever be driving through flooded intersections. Yes, I do believe that it will deter some additional traffic, going west on Newark. Not sure about specifically First. You said First between Monroe and where?
And Madison.
And yeah. Madison.
And
actually, if we flip back to that map, that might be helpful to see.
Yeah, because cars will not be able to go east on First Street. Oh, not that one.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, they will not be able to go east on First Street from Patterson. There we are. They won't be able to go east on First Street from Patterson Avenue. So, I mean, only say if somebody were coming north on Jackson and then making a right on First, but it certainly will deter a lot of the traffic that would have otherwise come, say, down Patterson Plank and onto First.
Well,
So,
also, usually a lot of the traffic is coming southbound on Monroe. That's one of the most trafficked streets in the area. And the thing is also to take note, First Street, as far as I know, is considered a county road.
It is.
So it has a particular type of other status here. But, I've witnessed, some flooding that's occurred usually on that corner of Monroe and First, and looking at some of the warning maps and so on for parking, they've never included that area as a flood-prone corner. Up until now, I've never seen it included, and yet I've witnessed it get flooded a number of times.
Okay, that's something we can consider, Sergeant Montanez. We can discuss that after, and provide other barricades at that location potentially.
Upstairs, okay.
To prevent traffic going west on First Street, but hopefully we will get the traffic going east on First Street, coming south off Monroe. But we, hopefully we'll capture some of the traffic by the barricade that's at First and Marshall. And in addition, we will now have these real-time gauges in the area to be able to further communicate when nearby intersections are flooded. And, typically we know that once one really low intersection floods, you're going to see flooding soon thereafter at other intersections. So it will also improve our communications to hopefully deter people from driving down First Street and several other streets nearby these locations of sensors and barricades. So a lot of this data is going to help us tailor where we're currently putting barricades and where we will be putting barricades in the future. Both additional barricades through the system, such as automated barricades, or the traditional yellow barricades that we use currently. I think let's see, it's about 6:40, so we definitely have time for a few more. But Rachel and Jim have their hands up. Yeah. Rachel, would you like to go?
Yes, hello, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, just to echo the previous conversation, and I believe you said you're going to send out a poll to see if we could get some consensus on what the language on signage would be. The word flooding is definitely a sensitive word. So if we could avoid that word at all costs, even just something so generic as road closed or road closed when lights are flashing, I think that should be more than sufficient to keep people off the road and even the sidewalk. So, but I'm looking forward to the poll. I just wanted to add that little tidbit. Thank you.
Thank you. Barry, or I'm sorry, Jim, I had promised you'd go next.
Thank you. Actually, I have two questions. One, I see here on the map on the Hoboken, New Jersey Gov site here that there are two types of gates. One automated, and then there's another type manual. And I was hoping you could talk to what the difference between those two are. And then the second question or point I wanted to make is following up on an earlier point that was raised on this being a pilot, yet it's still, the stickiness is there. Where we put this infrastructure in, it's in. I'm wondering if there's any possibility in decoupling the gates from the gauges, because it seems like it may be valuable, as you said, Jennifer, to deploy these gauges and get the data and then make more informed decisions. So is there a real allocation that could be made to say, take one gate away and add 3 more gauges to get you more data in your program? So I'm wondering if there's any sort of trade-offs that could be made there. Thank you.
That's an interesting suggestion. I'm not sure if we can, given the given the discussions with the vendor and the contract has been awarded, but it is something that we can look into. And then the first question, thank you. And then the first question, what's the difference between the automated versus the manual? Right. So, I mean, the sensors are in all cases automated. So all of that data goes immediately to the cloud. But the barricades, some being manual, would have to be lowered physically, just like our staff are going out and putting out barricades, but they are a much more effective barricade than our yellow barricades, frankly. They can't be just moved by an average passerby, whereas the automated ones can be automatically lowered when the level of rainfall exceeds the level of the catch basin. So they will actually be programmed to come down automatically.
I jumped in there. Just to double click on that. So for example, at the 7th and Clinton location where it's manual, someone still needs to come out physically to that location during a storm event and lower that gate or they could do it remotely. So
no, for the manual ones, we do actually have to go to that location and lower the gates, but they wouldn't be the yellow gate. Yasmin, sorry, do you want to clarify?
Yeah, and also at that 7th and Clinton location, because there are utility lines above, that's actually going to be a folding manual gate. So when it's in its resting position, not deployed, but actually resting, it's not as tall as the other gates because the gate is actually folded. So I just wanted to clarify that as well.
Meaning the arm will fold. You're saying
the arm will
into
fold.
2 or 3 pieces. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess just to follow up there. I mean, I understand limitations, funding but if someone still needs to come out physically during a storm event, I don't see how this gate is any better than a wood barrier. All we're doing here is adding, as the other parties on the call said, you're adding labeling to this location that may not be valid, right? It's not a flood-prone area, and then we're still saying someone has to come out and put something there, right, to have any impact. So that's worrisome about this location. Even it's still not adding significant value beyond the wood barrier as far as I could see.
So, I mean, it does add the value of being a much more effective barricade than a yellow barricade. We also don't need to put it down if that sensor is not covered. So we're not leaving yellow barricades at that intersection, which right now is what we're ending up doing. We leave, barricades near 7th and Willow in advance of a rain event, right? We wouldn't need to do that if we actually didn't put it down if there was no flooding, if the flooding was not intense enough. But I do hear what you're saying, and I hear significant concerns today about the location at 7th and Clinton, which is effectively to protect the inundation at 7th and Willow. But we hear you, and it's something that we're going to take your feedback back and reevaluate how we move forward at that location.
Thank you.
And I think Barry.
Hi, yeah. This is actually Rachel. I wasn't able to unmute on my other phone, so I'm on my neighbor's phone. Building on what Jim had said, given this is a pilot and you need kind of sufficient data to, I guess, prove your hypothesis or disprove your hypothesis, I think just reiterating the fact that relooking at the 7th and Willow location, you're not going to get much data. So I think it probably isn't prudent to include it in your pilot.
So I want to speak to this, the flood prone area designation. So the work that's been done, there's been 3 separate studies that have been done going back more than a decade. So the first is North Hudson has studied flood prone areas within their sewer system and identified these areas through, 2-dimensional modeling as having constraints in their system. That those data points were corroborated during the environmental impact statements for the Rebuild by Design Hudson River project, and both through 2-dimensional modeling with a different flood model system. Those are both rainfall relating, but there is an underlying flood risk in the entire western portion of the city that's related to coastal flooding, which this barricade system is not meant to address. So I think that one of the things that we'll do is post those studies on the webpage to show where we've modeled the likelihood of flooding in these areas. And then I guess the last thing is we have probably more than half a dozen or a dozen times where we've observed flooding in the locations that we're proposing. So what I'm trying to get at is that there's relative certainty of a lot of these locations having a higher vulnerability to flood risk, but that what is underlying is that the physical the intersections that are in red is different than the gate locations. So the gate locations are not necessarily an indicator of a flood prone intersection, but the gates have to be placed at the intersections that precede these intersections in our transportation network. So I think that what I'm hearing is that our team needs to work to better articulate the information that we've gathered, the methodology for selecting these locations, and then presenting that information back out to this group and other members of the public. So I appreciate all the feedback that we've gotten.
Yeah, and ensure that the data you're collecting will allow you to meet your goals. Because I think either way, I get your point, but if you're not collecting a lot of data because an intersection floods, 0 to once or twice a year, it's probably not like super helpful.
Understood.
Barry?
Hi. I think this is a great start, and I missed the first 20 minutes of this. But I understand this is the first effort. So that's why it's not addressing the northwest part of the town. And I know most of the heavy flooding does happen in the southwest part of town. Was there any discussion about like identifying, streets that are known flooding, and maybe instead of putting these paper signs up all the time, maybe just painting the telephone poles, say green or something like that, so people know these are like prone to flooding and things like that, or just having permanent signs up. I know there's a sensitivity, as someone just said in the last few minutes, that when people, when they hear flooding, it's like, oh my God, am I moving into a flood area? Well, we all know traditionally west of Willow, the town floods. I live on Bloomfield Street, and my basement has flooded in the last 5-10 years. But this is the reality of where we live. And if we deny it, it's like cancer. If you deny it, then it's going to come back and haunt you a lot worse than if you're not aware of it. But thanks for the efforts, and hopefully we can if we make this front and center, we're all going to have less damage to our property.
Thank you, Barry. That's a very interesting suggestion, and something that we've talked about for a long time: permanent signage rather than the temporary no parking signs. And actually, locations where we typically place temporary no parking signs and deploy barricades were two of the large factors, pieces of data really, that we used in selecting these locations. So it is an interesting point. So I think we've heard a lot of great feedback tonight. We will take this back to our vendor and see how we modify the project moving forward. And we greatly appreciate everybody coming out and giving us some really good suggestions. Hopefully that I know that we only touched upon some of our other flood mitigation infrastructure projects this evening. But in addition to this, if you'd like to visit the city's website at hobokenandj.gov/sustainability, you can see all of our flood risk reduction projects for rainfall flood mitigation, as well as the Rebuild by Design Hudson River project. So I'd like to close with encouraging everybody to take a look at our website, email us if you've got questions, and we look forward to speaking with all of you more going forward. Caleb?
I just want to say thank you, everyone that came out to provide feedback. And Jen, thank you for you and Yasmin putting this together. So If you could just go back to the last slide, Jen, so our contact information is up there while we close out. Thanks, everyone.
There we go. Thank you so much. And we look forward to speaking with you all soon.
Okay,
Have
thanks
an awesome night. Thank you.
Thank you.